everybody. Hi. It's me. I'm Gail Carriger. And today we are having a chat. We are having some hair issues. And also, we're going to be having a chat about author events because you may or may not notice in the course of this live that my energy levels are a little bit low. And that's because I just came back from an author event on the other side of the continent for me, which was Connecticut, and I'm just about to go off for another one. So, hello to everybody watching. Hello, Lavender. How are you? I see familiar faces and names and unfamiliar ones. As ever, I always ask as you tune in, or if you're on YouTube or wherever you're watching, if you would just tell me where you're tuning in from. It makes me really happy to see people from all around the world. It's such a cool thing. Hi, sweetie. From Colorado. Yay! Anyway, so traveling. I thought I would talk a little bit about one of my great loves, which is traveling. And one of the things I didn't realize when I moved from being an archaeologist to being an author is that I would actually be traveling more than I had as an archaeologist. That was not something I would have chosen. North Wales, see? All over the world. And Maryland. I was just in your neck of the woods. Anyway, so I travel a lot. I travel a little bit less now than I did at the beginning of my career. And from an author's perspective, there are several different kinds of events that we go to, especially if you're in sci-fi fantasy world. So I thought I would kind of go into what those events look like from my end. And you guys should feel free to ask questions at any time. Of course, there's always a Q&A session at the end, and you can ask anything you want. So where was I? All right, so events. So from my perspective, there's a couple of different kinds of events. Authors have book tours. Book tours are usually things that are arranged by a publisher for an author, and they're increasingly rare in this day and age. A book tour used to be something like 7 to 9 cities in 8 or 10 days. So really kind of tough. So you would basically, wake up, you fly, you check into a hotel. If you're me, you get gussied up, you put on the face, you get ready to go, and then you go to an evening event at a bookstore, and then you fall asleep at the hotel. If you get some food in there somehow, and you wake up the next morning, and you get on the next plane, and you go to the next place, and you go to the next bookstore. And that usually happens around the time that a book is launching. So that's what a book tour is like. I really don't do book tours anymore, partly because I don't write very many books for traditional publishers anymore, and partly because it was a lot. It's pretty brutal to do. Also, independent bookstores have been struggling. It's harder and harder to organize an event for an author, especially for a lesser known author. So that's book tours. Then there are different kinds of conventions or fan-run conventions, or some of them are official conventions if you write for something like the Star Wars universe or what have you. And those kinds of conventions range, and I usually think of them in terms of size. So there's sort of smaller conventions, say 200 to 500 people. Those tend to be like littler conventions, very specialist conventions. Steampunk events are often like that these days. So the convention I just went to was one of these smaller ones. They're usually fan-run or participant-run. And then there's sort of larger conventions or mid-sized conventions. These can also be fan-run, something like Worldcon or World Fantasies. So we're talking over 1,000, but nowhere near as big as, say, a Comic-Con. And that's the final one. Comic-Cons tend to be run by larger organizations or operations. Pop culture cons is another way to think of it. And these ones are over 50,000 at least, and they're big. And they have a lot of media, stuff like that. So I try to visit different kinds of cons in a year. So I try to do like one larger one mid-sized one small one. And then there's 2 other events that I do as an author. There are conferences, writer or author conferences. Those are business of writing conferences. So they will have things on craft, but also things on marketing and publicity strategies and that sort of stuff. So sometimes I'll be doing presentations at those kinds of events as well. And then I'm flying in specifically to be a speaker, and I won't actually be doing many, if any, fan events when I'm in the area. Sometimes I'll try to organize a signing at a local bookstore if at all possible. But sometimes I'm just in town to present for authors. So it's an author networking kind of thing. And then the other kind of event that I do regularly is a writing retreat. And that's me with sometimes just one or two other authors, sometimes half a dozen, sometimes up to 20 authors. And that's usually a little bit longer. Conventions tend to be just a weekend or a long weekend. For me, a writing retreat is usually at least a week, or I try to make it a week. And then I'm just writing with other authors. So again, it's a completely different thing. So those are the different kinds of events I do as an author, and that you may do if you become an author, or that you might see me at. But I do try to pick and choose a whole range of different kinds of events, including online and virtual events. So you can see me if I'm in your area. I try to get around to different parts of the world and different parts of the states as much as possible. So, like recently I was on the East Coast of the U.S. and then, I have an upcoming event that's going to be in Chicago in the middle of the United States. And then I'll have another one coming up that's down in Anaheim in LA on the West Coast. So I try to kind of spread it out, different kinds of events and different parts of the world that I get to. Sometimes if I'm really lucky, I get to Europe. And then I thought I would show you some of the things that I bring with me as an author, like my author kits or what have you. So let's see. This is my baby Gail kit, so to speak. It's hard to see what's in it, but essentially it has a mini sewing kit, which I've put together, which basically includes anything, because I wear vintage, and if you wear vintage, you need to be able to repair vintage. So that's what it looks like. Yes, those little folding scissors, they do get through security. I've not yet been stopped for those scissors. So this is all in my carry-on. What else do I carry? I carry a binder clips. Those of you who don't know, I'm like queen of the binder clip. I have repaired a toilet with a binder clip. I think they are the greatest freaking things ever invented. I love binder clips. I have a purse that looks like a binder clip, so I'm always carrying binder clips. One of the great uses of binder clips is holding hotel curtains together. If you are pretty light sensitive, it's one of the tricks. I tend to carry this, which is a teaspoon on a chain. Don't ask me why, but it always comes in useful. So that's usually in a hotel room with me. I think this is extra sleeping earplugs and things like that. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so when I'm in a hotel, I try to do as many things as possible to protect myself. And then I have my several different kinds of pens. So these are pens that you'll see me wearing around my neck. One of the things that I have in common with many authors is if you catch me unawares, I probably do not have a pen on me. And people used to catch me at Comic-Cons and stuff and ask me for a signature, and I wouldn't have a pen, and I'm an author. You're supposed to have a pen. So I just started wearing them around my neck. So I have 3 pens that hang around my neck, a steampunk one and a silver one and a gold one. So they go with every outfit, of course. I also carry a highlighter because I do like to go to panels sometimes and attend things. So I use this for highlighting programs. I carry a Tide stain pen at all times. I am steampunk enough to always carry a brass carabiner with me. You never know when these might be useful. And then I carry my own little folding name tag because conventions don't always remember to give you a name tent. And then mine has a QR code on the back, which takes people to my website. So there it is. I also have a couple of little badge ribbons that people have given me that for some reason or another I didn't actually wear at the time, probably because it didn't match the color of my outfit. So I just keep emergency badge ribbons, I guess, just in case. So that's my convention everything I might need sort of kit that's specifically for me and my style and my outfits and stuff. And then for other events, I have a bigger kit. So this one has, as you can see, it has basically a wrap cover for Soulless that I can unfold and prop up if I need it to. And then it has a bunch of different kinds of bookmarks. If you've ever seen me in person, you will see me passing out bookmarks. The bookmark that everybody always wants, that you're like, if you can catch me, you want this bookmark, is she can get it out. Is this one, which has all of my books on it with the colors of the spines of those books, because I love to color coordinate stuff, on one side. And then on the other side, it has all of the other books by other authors that I just always find myself recommending on panels and at conventions and events. So that's like the clutch bookmark. But I also have bookmarks for all of my different books and that kind of thing. So bookmarks travel with me. Business cards, and then of course all of my pens for signing things for the signing line. So because I have the manga edition, I carry like a silver pen so that I can sign the glossy pages. And I have Sharpies and gels and all of the things that one could possibly want for in-person signing events at conventions and stuff, and including this, which is, some of you may have seen this very, very recently, which is the Cheer Up Sign Up. So I also travel with an actual physical thing. You can sign up for my newsletter in person if you'd like, and I will bring it home across the country and manually enter your email into my newsletter system. So yeah, those are some of the things I travel with that I recommend other travels with. And now, the important bit, which is the tea kit. This has been shown off before, but I'll just show it off again for all those interested. The tea kit contains, of course, tea. In this case, because I will be staying in a place overnight, it contains, these are my tisanes, my non-caffeinated teas for the evening. And then it contains some oolong, which is one of my new favorite afternoon teas. Now, because of the way oolong looks, I usually put the oolong in my thermos just to be on the safe side. I carry some specialty, like individually wrapped teas, specialty. And then I carry a whole container. It's not in here because I like to keep it fresh, but I have a full container of 2 or 3 bags a day of the black tea that I drink all the time, which is Twining's Gold Label or the 1706 Strong. And then, because you never know whether you are going to have a microwave or what sort of situation you're going to be in with a hotel room, I also bring an immersion water heater or an immersion heater. And it's basically an element that hooks onto the side of a cup. And you stick it in cold water, and then you plug it into the wall, and then it boils the water for you. And it takes a little bit of time and patience, but it is the best way to have tea on the go if you are like me and you pretty much only function on tea. So those are like the 2 most important kits, I would say, that I travel with. And then I travel with the aforementioned thermos, which is a zojirushi, and a water filter bottle, because I don't like the taste of hotel water very much most of the time. That and a toiletry kit and a cute dress and a little turban, and I'm good to go. And my glasses, of course. So that's the traveling author. So if you all have questions about what it's like to travel and do events as an author, or if you have any other questions for me on this lovely afternoon in February, I'll be happy to take them. I'm going to scroll back and see if anybody left a question. Please remember to put a question mark at the beginning. That way, when I'm scrolling through comments, I can just identify who has a question and who doesn't. There's some cute comments about the new bookmark. Yes, the new bookmark is very crafty. I'm very brilliant with my bookmarks. No, I just thought it looked cute with all the spine colors. me and bookmarks. Also, I have so many books now. It's really hard to just like do a full list of all of those books. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of books. I'm seeing a lot of people clocking in and saying hi, but so far no questions. I can tell you about my epic, this is going to end up on 20-minute delay, but I had an epic return flight from Hartford, Connecticut. So I was at Stupid Cupid's Steampunk Ball, which was an adorable little event in Hartford, Connecticut. And it took me 18 hours to get back across the country. I could have gone to New Zealand for that time frame. Book has a very good fun question, which is, can I talk about some of the do's and don'ts of meeting an author etiquette? That's a really great that's a great question. I would say, generally speaking, authors are just pretty happy that anybody shows up when you're meeting an author in the signing line or at a bookstore or whatever. We're surprised that anybody wants to meet an author, and delighted as a general rule. I certainly am. But then I happen to have really cool readers, so that does make a difference. Usually, if it's a super popular author, like somebody like Neil Gaiman or something like that, there'll be a restriction of some kind in terms of you have to buy the new book that he's promoting, or you could only have maybe 2 or 3 books in the signing line. Sometimes for super popular authors, you can only bring 1 book to be signed. I will tend to sign anything anybody has. Sometimes signing lines are controlled in such a way that it's 3 books when you're first walking through the signing line, and then you have to go back and line up again if you have more books that you'd like to be signed. There's usually, and that's just because the signing needs to be done in a limited amount of time. So do think in terms of saving the author's poor hands and wrists, but also just realize that if you show up with like 30 books, you might have to get a few signed and then stand in line again a second time. But if you find me, I will usually be happy to sign all of the books if you would like me to. I figure. If I didn't want to sign them, I shouldn't have written that many, right? You're welcome to say something to the author, or in my case, I get offerings of food all the time, which I love. Please bring me food. Food makes me happy. I trust you not to poison me. Though, be aware the author might not eat it immediately in front of you. Don't want to get my makeup messed up or anything like that. That kind of thing. But yeah, I don't think there's a ton of etiquette. Generally speaking, people want to get photographs with me. And again, if I didn't want to be photographed with my readers, I wouldn't dress up cute. I'm game. It does mean that I usually have to persuade the event organizers to put me at the end of a table so I can bop up and take pictures. But usually the coordinators are pretty nice about that. And they're surprised, but they're nice about it. And then, of course, if it's a steampunk event, everybody knows photographing. I mean, of course, lots of photographs. So that's it. To me, there doesn't seem to be a lot of etiquette. I would say ask about physical contact. Like if you want a hug or something like that, just, be polite about those sorts of things. But you can usually pick up from the author whether they're a huggy kind of person or not. All right. Cool. I'm scrolling backwards to make sure I got the question. We have quite a few questions now, so now I'm up and running. Debbie asked, "How was the convention I just went to?" The convention was great. It was a smaller con. I would say 200 to 500. Very intimate, very sweet. Really, from my perspective, really well run and enjoyable. They had food for me, which you don't expect a green room with food at events. At least I don't. It's very nice when that happens. Mostly because it's not a bother to have to walk out or find food. It is when it's -8 degrees, which it was when I was there. But it's more that I don't eat a lot. So going and getting a full meal is just, it's easier for me if there's just a green room and I can nip in and eat a little bit and then go off and do my thing and then nip in and eat a little bit. I'm a bit of a grazer, I guess you would say. So a green room setup is sort of more to my taste. So yeah, for me, the convention was awesome. I mean, it's, of course, it's me. What do I talk about? I talk about the food. There was tea, there was caffeine, there was food, there was a microwave in the hotel room. Extra props for that, but that's the hotel's decision to do that kind of a thing. And I enjoyed all of the events that I was on and the panels. I wasn't overscheduled, which was really nice. And I met a bunch of awesome people, awesome readers and fans who had made the trip specially to see me, who I'd not met before, and some familiar faces. And it was charming. I had a really good time. The travel was epic, but sometimes that's the way it goes. Lavender asks, at this point in my career, are events places to find new readers or to visit with established ones? Visit with established ones. And I would say at the beginning of my career, it was like that too. Even when Solus was a big deal very early on and Changeless really made waves, the second book in my series, and I was doing book tours and things like that, and there were, 100, 150 crowds of people at a Borders, should tell you how long ago this was, waiting to meet me. It was people who had already read the books. The books find the readers who come to visit you. I think it's pretty unusual for readers to want to visit a debut author. I mean, there are, of course, exceptions, but most of the time, the people who show up to my events are people who are already familiar with me. And now that holds true for conventions as well. Now, sometimes at some of the larger events like a Comic-Con or, say, a Worldcon, even at a steampunk event, if I'm on a lot of panels and somebody's in the crowd who sees me on the panel, and then they'll, a geeky fan will be a geeky fan about this kind of thing, will go find one of my books and then come and get it signed or come to my coffee clutches or something like that. So sometimes I do get new readers that way. But predominantly the people who are there to see me specifically are there because they already know about me. It's not, I don't think it's a way I get a ton of new readers. Could be wrong though, and it's always changing, and each event is, a little bit different. Oh, good God, we're getting some really good questions, everybody. Rosas asks, was I scared the first time and how did I handle it? So I would say I was surprised the first time. So my very, very, very first author event was a safety event in that I did it in my hometown, basically. And I grew up in a very small town. So it was to a small crowd. I think there might be 10 or 15 people there. I did a little bit of a reading, but it was all people who were not necessarily my reader base. It was like my mom's friends and stuff like that. People who kind of I'd grown up with as a kid. And so it was a friendly crowd, but a slightly disinterested crowd, but a good starter for me. But I don't know that necessarily counts. My first bookstore event was at a local bookstore in San Francisco, and it was pretty crowded. It had already tested me, though, in a weird way, which is I'd gone in early on to introduce myself when the arc of Solus had just gone out, and the actual book had not been released yet. But one of the cashiers at this independent bookstore had read Solus in arc form and loved it so much and was already kind of a super fan. And so I turned up to introduce myself and say, hey, I'm Gail. I'm going to be having an event here in a little while. And she just started squeaking and jumping up and down and waving her hands in the air. And I was like, oh, this is a new experience for me. So that was good. It was good for me to sort of encounter like superfan enthusiasm. I've been a superfan enthusiast before, but I've never been on the receiving end. So that was kind of training for that. And then they had, when I had that actual event, I think they had about 60 people there. And that was my first like big, oh, this is a crowd of people who don't, there were friends in there, but because it was local, but mostly it was people who had read the book and just loved it and had decided to meet this new weird author in the scene. And then it graduated from there, and this sort of snowballed Soulless and then Changeless. Changeless was the first book I actually went on tour with, on book tour. In terms of like how to handle the speaking and the Q&A and stuff like that, earlier on I did do readings, which is customary for authors. I've just phased that out. I don't like to read my own books out loud. I don't think I'm very good at it. I'm not a very good actress, I don't think. So I personally phased that out. But originally I sort of did it the way you traditionally do it, which is to read a little bit of the book and then, maybe talk a little bit about that scene and what inspired writing that scene, and then to take audience questions. And that worked well for me. Now, in terms of coping with public speaking and speaking in front of a crowd, I had a leg up in that regard, which is I come out of teaching as a university adjunct faculty and is a TA. So I was used to standing in front of, 1,000 very reluctant and grumpy undergraduates and trying to hold their attention. So I don't really get, I don't have a fear of public speaking, and I don't really get very shy in terms of that. The great thing about being an author and doing author tours or author events is that you're an expert in the topic because it's you. It's what you've written. It's your own books. So it's not like you can make a tragic mistake or something. So yeah, I never really fretted that side of being an author. Although I totally understand there are authors out there who get really, really nervous. I just am lucky enough not to be one of them. So yeah, I think I handled it okay. I will say the first big book tour I had, where I was going to other places like Texas and eventually the East Coast, Chicago, down south to LA area, and of course up to Seattle, which still has one of my bigger fan bases. And I started to get crowds of like 100 or more people. The first time that happened and people were dressed up and just like cheering when I came in, I mean, it was like the author rock star thing. I was a little bit like, back up, what have I done? How did I get here? That song was running through my head. It was surprising to me. It still is surprising. It's still shocking to me. I mean, I just came back from Connecticut and there were people who had driven hours to come to this event to see me. And I'm still genuinely shocked and honored and awed that happens. I'm still like, wow, how do I get to do this? How do I get to write the crazy voices in my head and then have people love it and want to come see me and talk to me about it? And in some cases, just tell me how much, face to face, just tell me how much they love what I've written and love my characters or see themselves in my characters. It's like the closest to magic you get, quite frankly. It's amazing. So yeah, still sometimes surprised, but still surprised that there are people watching this. Sue asks, where do I get my glasses? I love them. Well, these ones are new, so they're actually still available. They're from a vendor called Voo Glam, which is an online vendor, and you just stick in your prescription. Just make sure you get the prescription correct. The first time I did it, I didn't get that right, and it was a mess. But yeah, you could just, and Voo Glam, and they specialize in like quirky cat eye and different artsy glasses. And I fell in love with these ones. I think they come in another color as well, maybe like a teal or a red or something, but I really like the black and white. Yeah, the super cat eyes. They have a whole section that's just for cat eyes, so it's made for me. Yeah, I love them. They're the best I've found that has vintage like. They're still a little bigger than true vintage glasses are. So the other thing I do is I have a vintage glasses vendor who shows up at one of my local retro fashion fairs, and I will buy vintage frames and then I'll take them to my optometrist and they'll put my prescription into the frames. All right, looking for the next question. Jean says that I look fabulous. Oh, thank you. How did you develop a personal style? I've always been really into fashion and really into retro fashion. So I'm not going to admit to my age. I don't think I'm supposed to do that anymore. But I grew up during, or I came into my fashion aesthetic during the kind of grunge 90s. I was not a fan of grunge, but there was a little cyberpunk kind of 1960s mod retro thing that went on at the same time, and that is the way I went. And in order to get that style, I used to shop at vintage stores. My mom is a pretty decent seamstress, and she at least taught me how to tailor. So I'm really good at like going and thrifting and going to vintage stores and then tailoring stuff and figuring out how I want it to wear it and how I want it to look. I'm also pretty lucky that I have the body type for vintage. So vintage is actually, especially during like the time of baby doll dresses and grunge and stuff, like vintage just looked better on me and fit well. So it's really easy for me to wear vintage, and I just got into it then, and I've never gotten back out of it. So I kind of followed it through the swing and the rockabilly, That's kind of more my style, everyday-ish dressing now. And then I got into all of the associated cosplaying. So like the Renaissance Fair in my neck of the woods, there's the Dickens Fair, recreation societies, social dancing societies, like Regency and Jane Austen events and all that sort of stuff. So I ended up, in my 20s, I had like all the different periods, right? So I had like a Regency dress, and then I even went all the way back to like Georgian and Rococo dresses. I had all the different costumings. I've pared it way back now to mostly just a handful of Victorian that can also be steampunk. But I used to have a lot. I used to be really invested in it. So yeah, and then when I was sort of thinking about how I wanted to be as an author, and I knew I would be doing conventions. I come out of conventions and I love conventions, and I'm a total geek. So any excuse to go to a convention, especially if I can be there for my job, like, yay, perfect. But I knew I would like to be recognized at conventions. I knew I wasn't going to go to a convention because I didn't want to meet my readers. And so I wanted to have a look that would make me recognizable walking around at conventions and stuff. And so I just really leaned into the retro look in particular because it marries pretty well to steampunk. I didn't necessarily want to wear steampunk all the time at every convention. That's a bit much, especially when you're doing book tours, right? I need smaller packing capacity. I need to not have to wear a corset. So that's kind of why I leaned into retro. And then I discovered an amazing Indian company called Ishakti, which makes dresses with pockets, but modern, but you can design them and get things cut to look super retro. So now I have a lot of modern dresses that look really retro but are actually modern. So they're a little, like they don't wrinkle as easily. They're a little easier to take care of. I can just wash them in a washing machine and stuff like that. So it's evolved quite a bit. I mean, I've been doing this for 12 years now. But thank you for the compliment, Jean. I really appreciate it. Lavender says, as someone who grew up in fandoms, how was the transition from attendee to guest? It was really interesting. So I spent most of my high school and early 20s from the sci-fi fantasy convention side of the equation as an attendee. But I did work the Renaissance fairs. So I had worked retail and behind the scenes. I was a boothie, for those who know the lingo. So I had experience kind of on the, I guess what you call the vendor side of the equation. And then one of the companies that I worked for started to do conventions. One of the vendors started to do conventions. So I started to get experience from the dealer's hall side or the vendor hall side of the convention circuit. I think this happens a lot to geeks who grow up in geeky worlds and grow up in conventions. You often get sucked into being on ConCom or being behind the scenes. And that's kind of what happened to me. So I started working in dealers halls, and then I did a couple of times where I was on the volunteer committee. I worked behind the scenes at a convention. I did programming and did a couple of other things. So I know a lot, I think more than a lot of authors do, about how conventions are run at the back end. And I think that makes me pretty sympathetic to them. Like, I know how many fires, especially small volunteer cons, are putting out the whole time you're there. I know it's really rough to have to juggle all of these things at once. And I know that it's done for pure love of the genre or the social movement or whatever it is that you're participating in to put on this con. And so I understand like what kind of information organizers need, and I'm really good about like staying on top of them and making sure that they're organized as well. Like, okay, it's time to reach out and remind them they need to buy the ticket, that kind of thing. So the transition, I think, was easier for me than I think it maybe is for a lot of authors, because I kind of knew, and I knew from going to panels with writers on it, like what is good about a reading, what is good about a panel, like which authors do well on panels, what it takes to be a good moderator, which is why I'm never a panel moderator, because I don't think I'd do a very good job at it. stuff like what makes for a good presentation, all of those sorts of things. And I kind of studied it because I always wanted to be a writer. So there was always a little part of me at the back of my head that's like, well, if I ever get lucky enough to be an author at an event, like how would I behave on a panel, and how would I behave at a coffee clutch or whatever, and how do I make it as fun for the people in the audience as possible, and as informative and as enjoyable, but mostly how do I make it fun? Because people are there to have fun. So that's what the transition was like for me. It wasn't particularly jarring. I would say it went relatively smoothly, and I enjoy it. I've always enjoyed going to an event and having places to be and things to do at that event. I like to be busy. I think that's why I got into like running a booth or whatever, because like I like to have a purpose when I'm at, like, even when I was first going, I would, fill up my schedule with panels to go to and stuff. And now it's just I still have a full schedule. It's just been provided for me. I like it. I like having responsibilities. I think it's a little bit like writing to an outline. I convention to an outline, right? When I go to a con, I really like writing within guidelines and writing to an outline and writing within the structures of a universe. It's why when I'm world building, so many of my worlds are kind of rule bound. I always joke that my worlds always would make good RPGs because I tend to like write those guidelines into the world building, and I'm kind of like that at a con. I like the guidelines, so yeah, they work really well for me. Melissa wants to know what we can expect from the Chicago Steampunk Expo. I don't know. You tell me. No, we really just got. I also tend to be like focused on whatever my event currently is. So I was hyper focused on the Hartford, Connecticut trip. And now Chicago is next, the Chicago Steampunk Expo. So we've only just sort of started opening up negotiations to figure out what panels I'm going to be on, all of that sort of thing. So honestly, I've never been before. I don't know what to expect. I can tell you that Chicago fandom is great. I always have a awesome time in Chicago. From my perspective, they've never done a bad con. So I think it's going to be a great event, but I don't know what to expect yet either. I think it feels like a pretty standard steampunk event, which means I'll probably be on a couple of panels. If I can persuade them, they'll give me some kind of coffee clutch. I always recommend coming to my coffee clutches if you can. I usually have lots of things to give away, and it's your genuine license to pick my brain. Because I will admit to things and talk about things at a coffee clutch that I won't, not even on a live, because this is live for anybody to see. I always make the promise that if you come and see me in person, you can bend my ear and I'll tell you secrets. That's one of the rules. So I think it'll be fun, and you can expect to see me in some fabulous steampunk garb. I think I'm going to bring out the gold one again. I wore it at this recent event, but didn't get any good pictures of it. So I want to go gold again. But we'll see. We'll see what I'll pack. But I think it's going to be a good event. Sue asks again where I got my glasses. Was it you who asked before? Vooglam is where I got my glasses, just for people who have tuned in late. It is a online vintage, new but vintage-like glasses place. Prescriptions place. Ashley wants to know how I feel about different people narrating my audiobooks. Well, in general, I actually have had some influence over my audiobook readers, or maybe influence is too strong a word. With my traditional books, my first reader for the Solace series was presented to me fait accompli. I didn't have a choice, and I was fine with her. She's fine. I actually think I think I like her noise. Her noise. I like her voice a lot. It's very round and warm, which I really like in narrators. So very happy to have her for the first 5 books. She does mispronounce some things in the first book, and that's because they very rarely ask the author for input on how things are pronounced, or I would have said it's Akeldama, not Akeldama, but whatever. I'm not too fussed. Generally speaking, I tend to think when my books are adapted into a new edition or style, like when it's the manga or it's audio, it's that person's interpretation of it. So you want me, it's the written word. That's where I did best. But if you want audio, it's going to be a narrator's version of my books. And so I tend to let the narrator do what they like and hope that they do it well. The only thing I tend to insist on is that the narrator be actually British. I don't think Americans are good enough to narrate a British book. Sorry to any Americans who think they are. So real British, especially as I have lots of different accents in my stuff, different classes, different parts of the UK. So I like somebody who can at least understand the nuance. And so Moira, I got to help pick. Moira narrates both the Finishing School series and the Custard Protocol series. I got to choose her. We had 3 narrators, and fortunately, everybody in the mix all liked Moira the best. So she was unanimously chosen to narrate those books. And I got to be one of the people who voted for those 2. And then since then, all of my indie books are narrated by, so the Fifth Gender, the San Andreas Shifters, and all of the novellas are narrated by narrators who I chose. So I specifically listened to, chose, hired, and paid for those narrators. So obviously, I think they are the right choice for the book. But I do like to move narrators. You'll have noticed that about me. I like to move narrators between all of my different books because it's a different POV character, so I think it's fine to have a different narrator, and I think it's fun. But I do always try to pick high-quality narrators who I think are going to do a really good job, and I hope I have. Fingers crossed. Everybody seems pleased with the ones I've chosen, so that's how the audiobooks come around. Elsie wants to know who my favorite Finishing School character is. Whew, that's a really hard choice. It's always hard to pick your favorite when they're all born out of your subconscious. Dimity, obviously, is one of my favorites because Dimity is based on my best friend, so who may or may not be watching this, so I have to say that. No. Dimity's a favorite. Viva's a favorite. Sophronia represents a huge part of me and my love and you know, the person I wish I had been in high school and stuff like that. So, you know, I gotta say Sophronia as well. I love all of them. Pillover, like who couldn't love Pillover? He's so grumpy and adorable. Again, looking for a question mark. Ty wants to know, what's the weirdest / best thing I've ever signed? Good question. I signed a very sexy bicep once. That was really nice. I have signed a teapot, a teacup. I've signed the handle of a parasol and the fabric of a parasol that was going to then be embroidered. I thought that was pretty cool. I have signed a hat quite recently. So, yeah, I've signed some pretty cool stuff. Somebody had me sign their actual Kindle, which I thought was I felt quite privileged, but also I thought that was kind of cool. What a neat thing to collect signatures on. Kindle cases. I've signed quite a bit of stuff. This is the thing about being in steampunk is people have cool gadgets and things they've invented, and then they're just like, will you sign the thing? So, it's always fun. Lauren asks, Lauren wants to know if I'll ever write anything historical that isn't Victorian or Edwardian. I would love to. I have written a few things, the short stories. So there's a short story called My Sister's Song, which is set during the Roman Empire in the Black Sea area with the Hikakomeati tribe. And that has to do with my own research at the time, because archaeologist. And then I do have areas in which I am, you know, relatively well-versed with my background. And it would seem to be a shame never to set anything in those time periods. So I don't rule it out. I just haven't. Alessandro's book is set, or Alessandro's short story, The Curious Case of the Werewolf That Wasn't, is set in the Regency time period. I do love the Georgian. I love the Rococo era as well, mostly because of the big panniers. I think they are ridiculous. Blame Dangerous Liaisons for that one, probably. But much more historical also super interests me. I mean, there's a reason I touch on Zenobia, Alexander the Great, characters like that in my books. And that's because I really am attracted to that time period, the ancient world time period, particularly the kind of Fertile Crescent and down and over of the Mediterranean region. So I'm not against it. It just hasn't happened. I'm not dead yet. There's more to write. Lavender would like to know, prints signed. Are there any prints of my covers available to purchase? I think I have a couple of them in my shop, maybe just Competence, the UK version, because that's the cover that I own the rights to. And I just stuck it up there to see if anybody was interested in it, but nobody's ordered it. So yeah, I never bothered to put up any of the other covers. The thing is those tend to fall under merchandising rights, and I don't always buy those rights from my cover art designers. So that's why they're not always listed, and it might not be the cover that you particularly want that I am able to put up. For example, the manga covers I can't do anything with, and of my traditionally published covers I can't offer any of those, sadly. But I have thought about it. It's just people don't seem to be that interested in it. So, I tend to react to what you guys want or don't want. So, like that's kind of how I run my whole career, quite frankly, is like, are you interested in this character? Okay, I'll write them a book. Would you like me to do this thing? Okay, I'll put it up in the Zazzle shop. Robert comments that they've been seeing a lot of Regency comedy romance novels coming out of the past year. I would tend to blame Bridgerton for that. That's my temptation anyway, but I'm really delighted to see it. More comedy is good as far as I'm concerned, and more comedy in a historical setting, even better. I think the world is always hungry for more comedic writing, comedic romances, comedic science fiction, comedic fantasy. Like, it's all great for me. I love that stuff. I dearly love to laugh, as Jane Austen would say. Anne wants to know about a possible trip to the UK. Is it likely to happen soon? Next year, if it happens, I think. Worldcon is in Glasgow in 2024, and I would like to go. I don't know if what my life will be like by then. But I miss it. I've been back in a really long time. And if I'm going to trek all the way over there to go to Glasgow, I'm going to go to Edinburgh because I love Edinburgh. And then probably going to take a train down, go to Nottingham, which is where all my friends are because I went to school there, and then down to London because that's what I would do. So maybe even go to the south to Exeter, which is where my family is. So yeah, that would be the plan. That's a big trip though. It's a long trip. It's a lot of time to take out of my schedule. But also it's been a really long time since I've been to the UK, and I really do miss it a lot. And I miss my friends there, and I miss seeing my readers there. So we'll try to organize something. But next year would be when it would happen, with the excuse being Glasgow. Ty wants to know, with the new sci-fi books, if I'm going to do more sci-fi cons. I'm always excited to do sci-fi and fantasy cons. So I'm doing WesterCon this year, which is in LA, which is going to be great. I'm so excited about that con. I cannot wait. And I would always love to do more. I love doing pop culture and Comic Cons, so I'm hoping to put more of those in there. Yeah, fingers crossed, definitely more. Yes, more sci-fi fantasy. But honestly, I'm at the point where I pretty much just like people who ask me if it works within my schedule, and like I said, if it fits with the sort of dynamic of where I want to go, in terms of where I've been recently, what part of the world and what size convention. That's kind of more how I choose which cons to go to than anything else. But yes, I do love sci-fi. I mean, I grew up in sci-fi fantasy fandom. That's my heart. Ashley asks, I write sexy and sensuous scenes well. Oh, thank you very much. They are very, very hard for me to write. What do I think that I do right in this regard? Oh, sex scenes. I do have a blog post out there. If you look up Gail Carriger in defense of sex scenes or why write high heat, I have a post about why I consciously decided to do that and why I consciously decided to do it as some of my first indie stuff when I was breaking away from traditional. Not because I necessarily felt stifled or anything like that, but just because I like to push myself, and I find it difficult to write sex scenes and high heat, which basically means I ought to write it. I find comedy very difficult to write, which is one of the reasons I write it, because I like to challenge myself. And, you know, one of the things my mother always said is, if it weren't difficult, it wouldn't be worth doing, darling. So anyway, that's one of the reasons I do it. Why do I think? Well, I put a lot of comedy in my sex scenes. I think sex is, by its nature, kind of funny and a little bit ridiculous, and we should face up to that. I write books that are, in general, about intimacy and connection, whether it's friendship or lovers or groups or, like in the case of the upcoming book, a band, you know, a musical group, or a band of people trapped on a spaceship together. You know, that's what I write. I write about intimacy and connection, and that, at its heart, that is what a sex scene is about. It's about intimacy and connection. So I play with a lot of my strengths when I'm writing sex scenes, and one of my other strengths, I think, as a writer, is dialogue. So you'll notice my sex scenes have quite a bit of dialogue in them, usually. I'm also pretty good at, like, internalized pain and self-worth issues being made manifest and corrected by connection with another person. And this is the concept of the void in fiction, which is that your characters have things they want, but it also helps when you're a writer to think about what the void is in them. What's the thing that they're lacking inside that they need filled? And if you're writing a romance, it's about how the voids of, how two people who are broken, who have their own voids, can fill in each other's, or more if you're writing a poly romance. And so I use sex scenes to kind of highlight that. You'll see there's self-examination and self-worth that comes to the fore. I'm thinking specifically about, like, Enforcer Enigma, which I think is one of the better ones I've done recently. I think it also has some of my funniest scenes in it. But Colin in particular has real self-worth issues in that book, and then watching him kind of blossom because he is seen by another person and loved by another person is part of why their intimacy and sex scenes work so well, I think. So I guess that's what I would say. I also think sex is great, and it's not something to be embarrassed about. So, and different kinds of sex, and sex with different kinds of people, and between different kinds of people. So yeah, I think that helps when writing a sex scene. Ty gave us a 10-minute warning. So any final questions would be awesome. Spice and Diet Spice, says Robert. That's very funny. Been a little out of that conversation, but it's a very funny way of putting it. Yeah, I wrote Fifth Gender as, like, a real challenge to myself because, you know, people are always talking about tentacle porn and hentai, things like that. And I was like, well, let's see if I can really make it sexy. You know, I like to do that. And then I'll write stuff that is relatively low heat. The upcoming series, it does have a romance thread, but that's not what the story is necessarily about. It's more about the main character finding his, like, friendship group, finding his people. It's definitely a found family narrative. And so there will be some sex scenes, but I'm actually not going to put them into the release. They're going to be offered as little extra bits, or I might do, like, a high heat version of the second book, for example, because I just don't think it's, like, completely necessary for their characters in this book or in this series. So, you know, that also happens with high heat for me, with super sexy times, is, like, sometimes the book is like, or the characters are like, yeah, you don't really need to check in on us that closely, Gail, like, back away. So I don't always do it. But I do love, I have grown to really enjoy loving writing them. But I did start out doing it because I was scared. And move in the direction of greatest courage. A podcaster of my youth once said. I've always liked that statement. Charity says, found family, helped me find my family. Yes, we were talking about this actually at the steampunk event I was just at. For the first time I ever really, I gave the Heroine's Journey presentation, which is generally speaking for authors and creators. I gave it at this event, which is a fan event. So I basically gave it to fans and readers. And it occasioned some interesting questions from said fans and readers later on in the course of the convention. which one of them asked me straight out what I thought the messages of my etiquette and espionage books were, for example, which you can see in the live that I broadcast from the event last weekend. But I mean, I've never been asked straight up what my messages are. And I would say one of my core ones is finding your family. And I think, Charity, to your point, that's because that's what happened to me. So I found my family first in high school, which is kind of what the finishing school books are about. It's about that journey, finding the people, when you're young. And then I found more family in fandom, and in amongst my fellow authors now. I have incredibly close and very dear author friends, who I maybe see 2 or 3 times a year, but still that's my family. So Charity, I totally get it. Yeah. And I've watched this happen with steampunk fandom, in the science fiction and fantasy world all the time, within the romance genre. You watch people, and it seems to me, and I don't mean to self-aggrandize at all, but it seems to me it happens in my signing lines a lot too. I'll walk up and I'll see a line of people waiting, and and it's my fans, and I know it's my fans because you guys are talking to each other, and you're dressed, and you look fabulous, and you're having little conversations, and it's like I can watch people. I mean, I think, isn't that the famous quote about a book is like the great thing about seeing a person reading one of your favorite books is it's like the book is recommending the person, right? And that's, to me, that's totally true. My best friend in the whole world, who may or may not be on this call right now, we met because of books, basically, because of a shared love of books, and we've stayed besties ever since because of that starter. So I think, yeah, I know personally from having done little announcements and best wishes videos over the years that I am responsible for several marriages, quite a few children, definitely some cats, that kind of thing, right? But I am also responsible for, or my books are responsible for, lifelong friendships and reader connections and stuff. That's the other wonderful thing about being an author. But that is also a wonderful thing about finding your tribe within fandom and within the convention world and stuff like that. So, yeah, books can help you find friends. It's really great. But I think that's why it's a theme I come back to, and it's why it's a theme that's in all of my books so strongly. It's, if you ask me my core beliefs, loyalty and integrity and friendship is probably the top one. So I don't think it's a shocker that so many of my books are about that or feature that. Emily asks, and let me just, I don't have the time check. Ty, give me a time check. Emily asks how I do my historical research in order to create the settings, essentially. I think that's what the question is. I can't read the rest of the question. Facebook isn't letting me, but I think that's what you're asking. Interestingly enough, we just had a presentation this morning in one of my writers group about historical research, but I actually have a blog post about this. If you Google Gail Carriger researching Victorian set or researching steampunk or whatever, you'll see a couple of blog posts pop up. I think it's 26 tips for researching historical sets, and that talks quite a bit about how I do my research. Also, in case you don't know, on my website, every book I've written has its own page, and in addition to the normal book stuff, like where to buy it and the description and stuff, below it, all of my books, I'll put a link to a special extras, and that always has all of the research I did. All of the background. Sometimes I'll have other books I recommend. So, for example, for Fifth Gender, there's a lot of research into that I did in third genders and anthropological research and cultural anthropology on the subject, and presentations and talks and all that sort of stuff. But also, I have a whole recommendation list of science fiction that features queer characters. So, if you're in, so for example, for the finishing school series, if you go to etiquette and espionage, there's a little link in there, which basically has a lot about the research, and then specifically the research I had to do with the finishing school books for each book, because each book I had to do a bunch of research into, say, women's education in the Victorian era, and then I did a bunch of research into how dirigibles float and spycraft and stuff like that. And so I always try to do that. I think it's just because I'm an academic. Show your sources, right? But also, if you're interested, especially, if you're educating and you have kids who might be interested, you want to point them into rabbit holes of more discovery. There's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I like to disseminate information a lot. I think it comes, again, I think it comes from being a teacher and an academic and an archaeologist. Like, why do the research if you don't show it to people and share the knowledge? It's our vested power, right? All right, I think we're closing in on the ending here, and it doesn't look like I have any more questions. I apologize if I missed one of your questions. Please know that I always go back and take a look and make sure and catch any. And if I find it, I'll either just reply you in the comments, or I will answer it in the next live. And there will be another one. I'm not quite sure when yet, but I don't want to leave you ever hanging. And thank you all for showing up and asking such great questions. It's been super, super fun. And I will see you next time. And some of you, I hope I get to see you in Chicago. Bye.